Hello everyone, welcome back to the Hawkins Do Copy podcast. My name is Lauren.
And my name is Emily, and in this podcast we talk about all things Stranger Things.
We do, except today we're talking a little bit outside of Stranger Things. We're talking about D&D, but not the way we spoke about D&D before. Like, we linked it quite heavily to Stranger Things.
Yeah.
In our last D&D podcast episode. And obviously this one we are going to touch upon some things, because when we were researching this, there was some links, and you can definitely...
Just a couple.
Yeah, just a little bit. But we wanted to delve into the Satanic Panic of the 1980s.
So we thought this would be a good opportunity. One, because it's spooky month.
It is spooky month.
But also, it seems like it's going to play a big part in season 4.
Yeah.
So obviously at the end of season 3, when you had the video montage, I guess you could call it, I think it was just before the buyers tragically left to who knows where. You had you had that clip where essentially saying about satanic rituals and all that kind of stuff going on with D&D. And I don't want to get into it too much, because I don't know how much legally we can say, because I don't know if we're allowed to really see it. But what I will say is that if you've seen the photo that is floating around of a certain character wearing a certain thing on them, I'd say it's going to play a big part in the season.
Definitely. And obviously there's the passing down of D&D to Erica at the end of season 3 as well. Sort of like, this is going to continue, and it's like a new generation playing this game. So it does sort of have that symbolism and kind of significance that this game is going to play a bigger part. I mean, it plays a part in every episode, in every season anyway. No, but it does, doesn't it?
It was an interesting part, wasn't it?
But it does. It has obviously a running D&D link to the show, and I think Matt and Ross Duffer said that they played D&D when they were younger, and it was a big game for lots of people in the 80s. So Satanic Panic, how does Satanism link in with the completely innocent Dungeons and Dragons board game that we know and love today?
So we did a little bit of research, and this seems
absolutely
to be
wild.
Yeah, it is wild. There seems to be a lot of things that seem to be leading up to it. So I'm sure that most people who are listening to the podcast have probably heard the infamous, if you play Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin backwards, it will start saying things like "the devil is coming, 666," etc., etc. And that was in 1971, and it seems to be where D&D kind of came in the late 70s. There seems to be a lot of events, there was a big thing with the fear of the devil.
Yeah,
you could say, in that era.
Subliminal messaging and rock music being really bad and having an awful influence, and sort of this violence. But I think that sort of has continued even now. You hear a lot about how video games make people violent, and kids shouldn't be allowed to play certain games because it will make them violent. But now I think we sort of have more of a understanding and psychological understanding because of advancements of things, whereas back in the 70s and 80s it wasn't like that, and we didn't have things like the internet and stuff. So scary rock music and this game that appeared where they're talking about demons and all these things that you can fight in the game, that for a lot of people was a big red flag and something which was dangerous. So even though we now know that D&D is just an innocent, fun role-playing game that everyone that lots of people love to play and sort of have big friendship groups and big groups where they play the game, back then people genuinely were scared and worried about the power that that this game had over the minds of young people, which
to the point where they actually removed any references to demons and devil from the game, I think in the early 80s. Yeah, because there were a lot of complaints, and we'll get into all those complaints in a second, because some of them they're quite dramatic.
So there's actually 3 main cases, like actual true crime, true cases that happened in the late 70s and in the 80s, where people believed that D&D was the root cause of what happened. So the first main case is in 1979, and it focuses on a 16-year-old student called James Dallas Egbert III, which is a wonderful name.
A fabulous name.
And James was actually a college student, so he was sort of a child prodigy and had gone to college in America earlier. Obviously he was 16, and typically you don't go until sort of 18. So he went missing from his university dorm, and no one knew where he was. So his parents hired a private investigator called William Deere. Now, good old William was doing his job, private investigating, as he was employed
as a private investigator does.
Yes. And he had heard a little bit about D&D, didn't really know what it was about, but he knew that James played this game. So he said that the disappearance was because of D&D, which was then later reinforced because James was found in the tunnels, like the maintenance tunnels, like service tunnels of the university. And they found out that that's actually where some people that played D&D would use those tunnels to reenact the game and in real life versions of the game. That's not what James was doing. James was down there because of psychological problems that he had, and he needed some help with those. But because later on he actually then ran away again and went to stay with one of his friends for like a whole month and didn't tell anyone where he was. But William Deere put 2 and 2 together and said he ran away, went to these tunnels because of D&D, and it must have been D&D that has made him act this way and cause these psychological problems, because D&D is bad. And I think that was sort of the start really of this problem with D&D.
It's one of those things that these true crime things annoy me, not because they're clearly very interesting, but it's annoying because I remember pre-season 3, so just after season 2, I had a theory about all of this, and I don't know if I've mentioned it. I may have mentioned it. I'll go into it again very briefly. But I had a theory that obviously that D&D was kind of the root cause of all of this, and that in my mind it was, this is the subject to debate. In my mind it was Mike, because he was the dungeon master, that he was kind of unknowingly making all these things happen. So obviously there's the Demogorgon, and Will rolls 7, so that means he's taken, and of course then later he is taken. And then at the end of season 1, when he's once again telling the story, it is a story essentially of Stranger Things. And this carries on then in season 2, I guess. In a sense, it carries on with that. You could argue then everything's happened in Will. You could argue that everything that's happened to Will in season 2 is because of D&D. At the beginning, there is a reference to tunnels, like in that true crime story, and that he creates the tunnels, so to speak. And then obviously in season 3, we then have D&D at the centre again. Will really wants to play D&D, as he tells us multiple times. There are compilation videos on YouTube. And obviously, once again, the story that he creates but it's Will this time as the Dungeon Master. He creates the story of season 3, essentially,
Yeah.
which then Mike finishes off and explains the ending of season 3 in episode 3.
Yeah.
So I had this real theory that it was a season 3 theory originally, that somehow that would mean that D&D had been this big thing and it was going to cause these issues. And this only makes me believe more these stories and the idea of Satanic Panic, that I was right. And it's going to annoy me that I'm right, because this was back in 2017.
Yeah, like the concept that it's actually not all like real and they were just playing the game the whole time and the whole show is just this really in-depth, realistic game of D&D. That would be wild. And then the game is passed on, so Erica continues it for it to continue. Kind of like a bit like Jumanji.
Yeah,
in that
actually,
sense.
I suppose so.
Yeah. And you know,
I also appreciate then. I was like, I'll briefly go into it. I'll explain my entire theory.
But like, I mean, you heard it here first. If it turns out to all be a dream, or you know, just the last episode of the final season just goes back to Will riding away, saying it was the 7. Or he doesn't say it's the 7. He just rides off, and everything's fine.
It is one of those things where I do think, part of me, if they did do that, and they'd actually filmed the end of season 5 at the beginning of season 1, I would be like, you know what? Fair play to, especially to Finn, Noah, Gaten, and Caleb, who've had to sit on that for a good few years at this point. But also, please don't do this.
Yeah, so obviously that is a big case, and obviously the whole tunnel thing and hiding under the tunnels and this realistic version of the game played a big part in starting Satanic Panic and this issue with the game. Then a couple of years later, in 1982, someone called Irving Lee Pulling shot himself in the chest and died. And Irving Lee Pulling's mum very strongly believed that this was because of D&D. So people in his class at school said that he also had a lot of like psychological problems and dealt a lot with his mental health, and there had been lots of sort of reports to support this and to support that it was that he needed psychiatric help. But his mum truly believed that it wasn't that he needed psychiatric help at all, and it was that he played D&D, to the point where she actually created so she sued the school for one thing, because it was one of the teachers that started the game that he played, and then 2, she tried to sue TSR, who published Dungeons and Dragons and owned Dungeons and Dragons at this time. That failed because the suing didn't work and she didn't win any of the lawsuits. So she created this group, which was BADD, BADD, which stands for Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons. And this was a huge advocacy group which was against kind of the rules and how you played D&D, essentially. And she was just essentially against all role-playing groups. And it is an interesting discussion to have, actually, because it's the same sort of thing now where you do talk about how some games, you know, that can be violent, and you think there must be some impact, you know, like if you're playing a game where you're killing people and it is a violent game, I can understand how that could have an impact on some people, and it does have an impact on some people. When
I was doing when I was doing a project with my youth theatre, I did little interviews actually on this, and obviously I won't go into too much detail because I don't think legally I can. But it was really interesting seeing actually all their responses, because I did ask them specifically about, do you think video games cause violence?
Yeah.
But we hit them with the hard topics, and it was very mixed, but the majority said yes. which is what I find really weird. And so the age group there is, I think at the time it was 8 to 13. And it could have been parental influence. It could have been them saying, don't play. The Grand Theft Auto was the big one that was caused.
Yeah, Grand Theft Auto is a big one. When I've worked with kids before, like I've had kids that have like made little like gun shops out of like Lego bricks.
Yeah, that's the thing. It could have been part of that, with them essentially saying, no, you don't do this because I'm a bit worried that you're too young. It could be that mentality, or it could genuinely be reacting to testing with their friends, and that was something that came up a few times.
Yeah,
and it's so interesting that kind of idea is still kind of enforced, I guess, in a sense.
It is
like a younger group, and it's still carrying on now.
Video games obviously do have ratings the same way that films do, and like people do sometimes like emulate what they are doing. Like my favorite video game series is the Uncharted video game series, and oh my god, like when I started playing that back in 2007, I would have been 12, and I wanted to be an explorer. Like I wanted to be a treasure hunter, you know, like I wanted to be Nathan Drake. So you are going to have that kind of emulating it, and especially obviously there is proof that some of these people did reenact live versions of this game, you know, using these tunnels to do that. So it isn't too far-fetched to understand how this conclusion could have been like decided, and how they came to these conclusions. And as a parent losing her child, you want a reason for that, you know. You don't want to accept that that reason is that he decided that, you know. You want a reason. And if he's playing this game that they don't fully understand, you know, because Dungeons and Dragons isn't a violent game, you know. It isn't like Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty, or, you know, even like Fortnite, which has like people killing each other, you know. It isn't something like that, but it was a role-playing game, which probably was a bit scary for some people to sort of grasp the concept of. Like, you're role-playing characters, so are you acting like these characters that could potentially be dangerous? And also I think it was like the first of its kind, or one of the first of its kind, like in a time where that wasn't so normal, you know. And she's a grieving parent who wants justice for the fact that her son has died, you know. She wants a reason for that.
I suppose if we think of, on that note, think of, say, Mike in season 1 then, that actively acting out that he is this creature and a monster, and really getting into it that way. So I'm presuming that Karen Wheeler is just simply like, you know what, do what you want, Mike, as the Wheelers typically are. But you can see why some parents would look at that and be like, why is my child really getting into this? And I think all the party did. And you can see that in season 1. I mean, Will full on comes around Mike's house like, I am now a wizard. Yeah, and this is who I am, Will the Wise. So you know what I mean? That it's
100%, absolutely 100%. And I can definitely see why like a grieving parent would do that. I think that Patricia Pulling was also very like against anything that was the occult. Anything that was the occult, and Dungeons and Dragons was linked to the occult as well. So it was seen as a devil worshipping occult thing.
I suppose if you think of something that would apply to that now, that Harry Potter, I think, had a very similar thing, didn't it?
It did.
The idea of it's wizards and it's magic, and anything that involves that kind of
Lord of the Rings.
Of it. Yeah, did you mean that anything that kind of, I guess, that doesn't make sense in our reality? Definitely look down on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really important. This is too long a discussion to get into in this podcast. It's a whole other thing, but I think it's really important to know that like the occult, it doesn't always mean devil worshipping and scary cult people. Like the occult is an entirely different thing. You know, sometimes it can be linked to that, but not always, you know, like but I think anything that's seen as that is that, people think that pagans are dangerous, people think that Wiccans are dangerous, but they're not. They're not worshipping the devil. And I think people made that assumption with this game as well. There was another case, a very extreme case in 1988, where Chris Pritchard actually, allegedly masterminded the murder of his stepfather, and someone that came in like with a mask on so they couldn't see their face, it was very elaborate, actually went in and attacked his stepfather and his own mother. And they think that he was the mastermind behind this attack. And then a couple of true crime authors that were writing about the attack made the link that Chris Pritchard was a dungeon master in the D&D game, and made the link that he must have got on sort of like a power trip from orchestrating these games and creating these games and running them. So he made that assumption. He wanted to put that into his real life and orchestrated these attacks. So I think all of this happening, the first case was 1979, and then the Chris Pritchard case was 1988. There was probably other cases in between and cases after and before, but 3 really prominent cases happened less than a decade apart. Definitely made D&D seem like a pretty bad thing. However, it did the opposite, and the sales of D&D increased astronomically.
Because of course it did.
Yep. So in 1979, D&D was worth about 2.3 million. That is what TSR made that year and from sales. But in 1980, which was just a year later, they made 8.7 million.
I mean, fair play to them. Really.
Yeah. However, by 1989, when the second edition came out, like Emily said earlier, they did remove any trace of like demons and the devil and anything like that. So whilst the sales did boost in the second edition, they definitely did remove some words so that it wasn't.
It would be a very. This is going to sound conspiracy, and obviously this isn't true. It's a very clever marketing plot. Do you think, though? I'm not saying in any way that the whole thing was orchestrated by the creators, but
because it could have gone the other way.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
think like the money rising there.
That is a huge increase of profit. Like they did very well in 1980. And obviously there's been multiple editions since, so it continues to do really well. It continues to be one of the world's largest role-playing games. It's been seen a lot in pop culture. So Jack T. Chick created something called Dark Dungeons, and there was a girl, she was involved in Wicca and the occult, and had occult training from Dungeons and Dragons, which again is very stereotypical for the Wicca like community, that like you obviously have to be evil and have like
of course
worshipping training, which is not at all what Wicca is in the slightest.
It's never that came up in also Scooby-Doo and was it the Zombie Island one? And you had the Wiccas there. They were the Hex Girls. Great band.
Like
even their marketing, like talking like they're a real band. You know what I mean? It was all very we're dark and witchy, and we're going to put a spell on you. So it's even in the media it's portrayed as that. We're the new podcast now.
Wicca is seen as something like a lot of people don't see it as an actual thing, and well, actually, it's quite a peaceful and lovely religion that people follow, and I am really interested in, and I'm doing loads of research on it, and actually do follow some of I'm trying to follow more and more of what they do and the practices that they have, and I think it is seen as they're witches, they're dark, they obviously follow the devil, which is not the case at all. But in Dark Dungeons, the girl converts to Christianity, of course, and then rejects the game, burns it, and then ultimately avoids hell, in which it's stated in Dark Dungeons that every D&D player will go to hell.
I feel like I've seen this.
Yeah.
Or I feel like I've seen something similar with it, because I remember seeing a program. I don't know if it was UK based though, when it was that same kind of thing where they would have people. What is the is it LARP? Is that when it's live action? Yeah, LARP, isn't it? When they were doing that, and I think it then twisted into that kind of, no, this is bad, we need to reject it. And so I feel like I've seen that movie, and if I have, it's definitely an interesting retelling of how Dungeons and Dragons works. I'm gonna check up on that later.
Yes,
we'll know next week.
Yeah, definitely. But like it is interesting, and like there was actually again more stuff in 1984. Neil Stephenson's novel The Big U, a live action D&D player, like a live action role player. I don't think it's actually specifically stated that it's D&D, but they're a role player for a game, dies in tunnels when they're playing a live action of the game, and another player becomes mentally unstable because of this and has a hard time distinguishing reality from the game, which is could also be a link to Stranger Things.
It does sound like it could maybe be a little bit of an influence.
And obviously it's been in Stranger Things, huge part of Stranger Things. Like, I think there was a big resurgence of people playing and getting into it and buying the game because of Stranger Things. You can buy a Stranger Things version of the game. So it's pretty big. And then in 1997, Wizards of the Coast purchased D&D from TSR, and started to reintroduce devils and demons and all that kind of thing. So now these games have it back in to it. The stuff that was taken out has been reintroduced. It's back in there. I don't think it's seen as much of a like danger as much anymore. I'm sure it still is by a fair few people, but Satanic Panic was definitely something like of the 80s when these things were not fully understood and there wasn't a lot of like psychological research and much of an understanding. And I think most of some things like this that happen does come from a lack of understanding, really.
No, I agree. And it is really interesting how it is woven into the show, I think, without them actually ever really telling us that.
Yeah, 100%.
Woven in. So the other day I did a bit of searching on the Spotify playlist that they actually released for it. So
yes,
if you don't know, so I think it was pre-season 2 in the promo stuff that Netflix did like a team up with Spotify. And you could do like this personality test. Mine was apparently Jonathan is my most closest personality type for music, which I disagree with. But
I can see that though.
See, that's the only thing I can. But also, the music on his playlist is not as good as the music on other people's playlists.
Okay,
there you go. So I had a look at the one that was done for Will, because obviously he's the one who's been most affected.
He's also Emily's favourite character, if you didn't know that by now.
But also, he's the one that is most affected by... He's actually got a really good playlist on there, actually, though. I recommend listening to that, because there are some top quality songs.
There are some really good songs on there.
Anyway, I digress. I was looking through the playlist to see what if there was any kind of links to this, and there are a good few mentions to the devil and demons and this kind of thing. So it does make you wonder if they are going to kind of pull the D&D is actually a lot closer related to, I guess, the occult, if we want to use that word, than we think within the show.
Definitely.
And
Like,
obviously, I should say that the playlist, I think they're official, but obviously they're not going to be, the duffers haven't gone round and said, yes, this song does definitely relate to this. Because I think Every Breath You Take is in there for Will, which I wouldn't associate, but there you go. So you know what I mean? There, obviously, take it with a pinch of salt. But
no,
there's some interesting ones in there.
Definitely, and I do think, like, if you think about what is at the root of the show, and what always sort of has stemmed from the show, it has always been D&D. And I think looking at it now in hindsight, of knowing about these cases, knowing about Satanic Panic, and knowing about what happened and the attitudes that people had, you can definitely see how that could play a part now, like in the show, and continue to play a part. And I think that it's such an interesting part of history, you know, because a lot of people would associate, you know, loads with rock music, people thought it was so dangerous for so many people, you know, it was seen as awful. And again, like, you know, games, video games, board games, anything that was slightly, you know, like even the Ouija board was a game. It was I think it was Hasbro. It was a Hasbro board game. I believe it was Hasbro. And now it's this like thing where you're going to summon ghosts and evil things. There's so many movies about the dangers of Ouija boards, and don't use a Ouija board. They're dangerous things, where it was literally a board game.
It's interesting though, because even now, even though I'm not a ghosty person and I don't believe in it, but I would not do a Ouija board. I don't know why. I just wouldn't use a Ouija board.
But this is such a thing, because they've become such a big part of this, like, don't use Ouija boards, don't do them, you know, and even little things like Bloody Mary game and stuff. It was still a game, and obviously, like, it is interesting to see the evolution of these things and how us as humans have treated certain things which did just start as an innocent game played amongst children and teenagers, and you know, and what that's become. So I don't know, I find the whole Satanic Panic thing really interesting, and I find how much of an impact that's then had in the media and popular culture. I think that's actually really good, and I wouldn't be surprised if Stranger Things do go down the route of it's a dangerous thing.
I think they've got to. I think especially with, once again, I'm not going to say it for legal reasons, but if you've seen the photo, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Especially with that scenario going on and things that have possibly been floating around the internet about that scenario. It does sound sounds dark, and it sounds like they are definitely going to address the Satanic Panic in some way. It just makes me wonder then, who's the adult then that's gonna go no, because it wouldn't be a Joyce Byers.
No, Joyce is pretty chill. Karen and I don't think Karen and Ted are like aware enough. Maybe
Dustin's mum then.
Claudia. I get Claudia Henderson wouldn't surprise me. I was going to say maybe we switch up our question of the week and ask you guys, who do you think is the adult that's going to say or it could be Lucas and Erica's mum, because Erica now has the game.
Oh, that is a point.
Like, she now has an actual copy of the game in their household. Or it wouldn't surprise me if it were, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was Claudia Henderson.
For reasons that we cannot legally say, I think
Claudia Henderson.
I think it's going to be Claudia Henderson.
Me too. What do you guys think? Who do you think is going to be? Maybe Ted Wheeler will surprise us and he'll be like, actually, I hate this game. I mean, but to be honest, he is someone that seems to believe lots of things that the news tell him and the government have told him. You know, he's quite this is bad, you know, Elle's a Russian spy, she's dangerous, the Russians are bad. Like, he's very, so you know, if he got wind of it and realized, he might have that opinion. The only parent that I think will be absolutely chill about it is Joyce. Like, I don't think Joyce is.
No, it wouldn't be surprised me if Karen did it, but also
No.
I feel like Karen has seen it enough, and I don't think she'd
But,
really
like,
care at this point.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if she thought, oh, they play it and now people are saying it's dangerous, and Will, like, ran away.
She might pattern
and,
actually kind of everything that happened.
Yeah.
Will then.
Yeah, Mike's attitude in season 2 and stuff.
Yeah.
The only one that'll be chill is Joyce, and she's the one whose son went missing and has had loads of stuff done. But
yeah,
there we go.
I think at this point, she's probably just like, anything could happen to him at this point. He touched his neck for a season, and now I've got the girl that replaced him when he went missing living with me. So I feel like at this point, it's just like, I don't know, anyone could walk through this door and anything that could happen, I just don't care.
Troy Bolton in Utah. On that note, yes, love to know question of the week. Who do you think is going to be the one if it does play a part? Or do you think it is going to play a part, and who do you think is going to be the ones that say it's bad?
In the meantime, you can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Podcasts, and pretty much wherever you can hear a podcast. You can also catch us on our social media, which is Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, which is at Hawkins Podcast, Tumblr, which is Hawkins Do You Copy, and YouTube, which is also Hawkins Do You Copy.
Full videos are now on YouTube as well. So if you are a visual person, YouTube is now allowing us to upload the full episodes. So if you want to watch the podcast rather than just listening to it, definitely go check out our YouTube channel where there are full podcast videos and also other videos to do with Stranger Things on there as well. Thank you for
our wonderful faces.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely wonderful. Thank you for tuning in to episode 15 of the Hawkins Do You Copy podcast. We will talk to you guys next week. Over and out.